Before I get too far, I want to make sure all my bell housing bolts are in and torqued down, because that hosing is probably going to get in the way, and the end cover is going to get in the way. So I'm going to grab my starter motor, put that back in, get all the bolts in place, and then just retorque these back down. Torque specs for these are 80 newton meters for the tops and 80 newton meter for the rear, which is the bolt that's all the way down in here, between the transfer case and the block. 40 newton meters for the rest of them. So that's the front starter bolts and that front bolt right there, and the two all the way at the bottom that you won't really be able to see. So this might be kind of difficult. It's probably take me like 30 minutes to do, because I'm gonna have to like lift up the whole engine, rotate it, and yeah. So I just torqued everything down, and I was sure that I got all the bolts, but I decided to double check all of them once more just to make sure I got all the right torques. And sure enough, this is why you double check. I did not even begin to tighten down that front bolt right there. It was still finger loose. So it's a good thing I double checked. Before I put the end cover on, this cam housing piece, I need to torque that bolt down in the cam adjuster first. The torque spec is only 20 newton meters plus a 45-degree turn, but I'm pretty sure that 45-degree turn is going to end up being a lot of torque. Well, getting that bolt to its 20 newton meters is a piece of cake, but that extra 45 degrees is outrageous. I mean, granted, I was just using my 1/2-inch ratchet out of necessity because I needed to use my breaker bar to hold the crankshaft bolt. Okay, before I forget, I'm gonna swap over that sensor right there and that sensor right there. The first one is that green one. And there's also that sensor with the black connector that goes right there into this piece that the oil cooler sits on. I guess that's part of the oil cooler. And I think this gray one is right underneath there too. So I gotta swap all those over, because the ones on this, I think there's just one. I think there's just that gray one down there. Oh, and that one. But the connector color is wrong, and that one's really short. Okay, so I just broke this loose. I don't have a metric big enough to crack this loose, but a 15/16 worked. I feel like that can strip pretty easily, so I'm not trying to go too tight with that. Next, I need to bring this yellow orange guy here. This is that one that they have, this really short one, and it's black, so it's gonna throw me off when I'm trying to find an orange connector. So I'm just gonna disconnect that. I'm gonna guess that's a 12. Nope, it's actually a 13. Yeah, I mean, that one's not on there very tight either. Let's get this one out. That one out. That one's actually being held in, well, on my old block. That one's being held in by this little guy right here. So I'm just gonna transfer this guy over just so that it has its little holder. It's pretty meaningless, but let's see if this 10 fits on here. Yeah, buddy. Man, that thing's like impossible to get to. You gotta like finger it. And it's got this little piece up at the top that's like stuck in. Man, that is extra. Okay, I'm grabbing a socket. This guy's a pain to get in. Okay, I got that sensor in. It was a little bit tough to get in. Okay, next I have this green one, which wraps under the oil cooler over to here, which is right next to where the thermostat housing goes. Man, that one was actually on there pretty damn tight. Has another one of those things that will pull straight out. This is fed right behind the oil cooler, so it's really hard to slide out. Look at that. And it's hooked onto the dipstick holder. There we go. Okay, I also pulled off that other little bracket because it wasn't fitting these two sensors. I swapped it over here. Now it holds those two sensors beautifully. So now I have everything installed sensor-wise on the front. So next I would be installing the coolant hoses and this mounting bracket. And then finally the cam cover and the fuel pump. So I think the best way to go about this is to do this accessory bracket first. So I have all my bolts in place, and these are gonna go to 40 newton meters. I've seen differing specs. So on one source I saw that these are actually stretch bolts, and on another source I found that there is no torque to yield, it's just a 40 newton meters. So I'm not sure what to believe. I have spare bolts in case they are stretch bolts, but I wouldn't think that they're stretch bolts. I wouldn't think that there's much torque on these considering they're just holding the AC compressor and the alternator. 40 newton meters is the spec that I'm going to use, and then I'll try to get those coolant hoses on. Oh, and I found that the knock center is supposed to be 20 newton meters, but I do not have any room to get a torque wrench on there unless I were to remove that entire oil cooler, including this black piece up here, and then I would need those bolts because those are torque to yield bolts, and I do not have the replacements for those. There's an order for these. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but let me double check. So that order that I just said is correct. So this is the first one, 40 newton meters. This guy, thermostat housing, will go right there, and then those two bolts right there will go through those two holes. So I have to take those off and put them through there so that that's held in place. Oh yeah, then these two bolts right here hold this thing in place down at the bottom. Get started with that. Any little thing like that, any little bolt like that is gonna be 10 newton meters. That's what I'm gonna be using. And then this right here for the thermostat housing is supposed to be 15 newton meters. I'll use the same spec for that if I can even find those bolts. Okay, so here's the part number for this thermostat housing washer, or gasket. Very lightly lube this up a little bit. I can slide this on here. Let's get this guy on there. So I'm having a little bit hard time getting this to actually go in all the way. Pretty sure the O-ring is not happy. I'm gonna try to tighten down both of the bolts at the same time, see if it walks in. I think I should do these oil cooler bolts first, and then I'll come back over here. Okay, so I got those in place. It's a good thing I have these long Allens. I forgot about these because my regular socket would not fit behind this piece, because that's a fit between this piece and the oil cooler to get that all the way back there. It's a really tight fit, and the sockets are way too thick to get in there. Long Allens for the win. If I push on it nice and hard, looks like it goes in pretty evenly. I think it just is tough to compress that gasket. Okay, so I tightened both those just by hand and actually got that sitting pretty flush in there. It's looking good. So I'm just gonna torque these down to their 15 newton meter spec. Okay, so I got those two little bolts in, and I'm just gonna torque those to 15 newton meters. And then I'll just get this little clamp thing back over this guy. Cool. Okay, I just need to find the bolts for this guy right here going into the head, and then I can finally get my cam cover on and fuel pump and all that stuff. I just got this AC compressor mounted up on here, mounted onto this bracket. It just has these three bolts. This one, and that one. These are 13 millimeter bolts, hexes. They are torqued to 25 newton meters. So the AC compressor is all mounted up, nice and tight. Next I have my alternator right here. This has two long bolts, one right here, one right there. And this is a little bit trickier to get on because so these two little spots right here, that one and that one, they have these pieces right here that will straddle this. So one spot goes here, the other spot goes right here. So it's a really tight fit, and you actually kind of have to like pound this into place over that, because here I'll show you in a second. Getting this off of that bracket, I had to hit it with a mallet. So I can imagine that putting it back on will not be smooth either. Yeah, so as you can see, it's extremely tight, and really you have to like hit it on. So I was able to get it started just barely, by hand without even hitting it with a mallet yet. So hitting this a bunch of times, I now have this top hole lined up enough for me to put that right through, and that will start threading in. The bottom one's still not quite lined up, so I have a little bit more hammering to do. Okay, let's see if this one goes in. Yep, that one went right in. It's not really threading in though. Not sure what's up with that. Looks like I hit it a little bit too far. Looks like I actually have to bring it back a little bit, which might be a little bit tricky. Yeah, after hitting on that a bunch of times, like it actually looks like it's too low on the bracket, which is weird. The bolt does slide through. Kind of starts threading, but it's like really tough to thread. And it's easy, then it's hard, then it's easy, then it's hard. So it's definitely not going in like perfectly straight. Okay, I got those both threaded in by pretty much by hand, just with an extension and the socket, just doing it with my fingers and my hands. So now I'm going to torque these down, and these are only going to 23 Newton meters. I probably should have done this beforehand. Just figure out that little stud on the back of here. Just figure out what goes to that. I'm not sure if, I suspect this goes there. This from the alternator. Since that fits right on there. That goes right over there. Then there's just gonna be a nut that holds that on. Okay, cool. So this is all looking good over here. Still work on this. I have a new gasket for that. So I'm just gonna have to take that off. Here's the part number for the new gasket. For a while I was trying to find the right bolts, and I still don't know for a fact that I found the right ones, but I found a few that work. These ones down here, they're little like Allen bolts. So there's 3 of them. There's these 2 right here, which are those 2 on the head, and there's one down there. It's the bottom right one. That one, this one right here is not used. That bottom right one is the one that it's for that right there. It's actually kind of cool looking in there. Okay, that is going in. So let's get those bolts in place. Okay, so after fighting with this for a little while, I got all 3 tightened down, and that piece is looking really flush up against the head. At first it was difficult getting it flush on the head, and I had to push pretty damn hard on this to get it flush as I was turning the bolts down. But it does look good all the way up and down, side to side. All looks nice and flush on there. So hopefully I don't have any coolant leak out of there. If I do, I'll pop that back off and replace that O-ring. I haven't been able to find the part number for that O-ring. My surfaces look all clean right there. So let's get this new gasket on. Get this on. When you're working on this, when it's on your car, good luck not dropping that one. That one's really tricky to get to. So figures, I go to torque down that guy right there to the 7 foot-pound torque spec, and it just is spinning. So that is stripped out, which really sucks. So I just removed all the bolts. The helicoil from inside there is on this right here. The helicoil came right off. That is just delightful right there. Look at that. I might be able to reuse it, but I don't know.